Good evening, everybody. Welcome to tonight's edition of Shop Talk, hosted by the Triangle Area SQL Server Users Group. In case this is your first time here, welcome to Shop Talk. The general idea is it's Monday. Hopefully, you've successfully achieved completion of work duties on a Monday. If not, then hopefully we're helping you drag out this day just a little bit faster. So with us, we have tonight, first off, a much thinner microphone. I'm going to talk about that in a moment. But yonder, we've got Mala. How you doing, Mala?
Hello, everyone. Glad to be back.
Yes, welcome back from your secret mission in the Pacific Northwest, where you definitely weren't working for a 3-letter agency. And in addition, we have Mike Christensen right down there. How's it going, Mike?
Hello, doing well, thanks. Hi, everybody.
Andrew says, end of work day? What a concept. Yeah, now granted, when you're working 24 hours a day, then days just kind of bleed into the next. But I would have no idea what that is. So, we've got a couple of topics for tonight. Topic number one is the turntables have turned in terms of audio. So, historically, long-time Shop Talk and Triangle Area SQL Server User Group, and frankly, anywhere where I speak, longtime people familiar with the lore will understand. I usually tend to be a very quiet speaker, not in the sense of I'm not speaking loud, but in the sense of my microphone is like somehow turned way down, and I've fought this over the years. I have very fancy equipment in front of me. It turns out I had that equipment configured all wrong for a few years. It was just good enough to get pretty good audio, but also wasn't actually appropriate. Because, like, for example, I have a little problem with plosives. And the problem with plosives is they pop. So what do? Well, you get a pop filter, like the one that's right there. But, that pop filter just doesn't filter pops sufficiently. So what do you do then? Oh, you get the puffy pop filter. Hey, the puffy pop filter, used to sit on here. But then maybe that wasn't enough because my plosives are powerful plosives. And so you get, like the external pop filter as well. And at some point you have 3 pop filters on the microphone, which is thereby dampening all other signals, which means you have to turn the gain up, which means that you folks get to hear me clack, clack, clack on the keyboard when I do anything, which is not a great. This sounds as bad as photography. Yeah, I knew that if I'm going to work on a topic that'll absolutely draw in the listeners, it would either be talking about my audio setup or talking about the weather and how I'm going to mow my lawn. So we decided backstage we would talk about audio instead of mowing my lawn. Even though both of those, they were like top tier, this is S tier content for Shop Talk. Mowing the lawn in 9,000 degree weather. Because, hey, that's what you do. It's what you do. And then when I pass out from heat stroke halfway through, and my wife laughs at me because look at the other half of the lawn. It's not done yet. What are you doing? I'm like, please call an ambulance. And she won't call the ambulance until I'm completely done with the lawn because then I won't finish the lawn. So pray for Mojo. But anyhow, so I did mow today. Yeah, well, good on you, Anders. Hopefully it was early enough in the day that, you didn't get that Norwegian sunburn. All 127 steps. That helps. I have a little bit more than 127 steps. It's 129. But yeah, so as far as it goes, turns out that I had some settings wrong on the microphone. Not so much on the microphone, on the preamp, my fancy preamp. Turns out as well that I can use digital gain in OBS Studio that I hadn't been using before. I strictly used analog gain, and that isn't the greatest solution. So basically, all things considered, that's life for you. If you read the instructions, then you'll figure it out. So he says, after watching various videos on the topic and realizing that, several of these settings were wrong for a while, and actually listening to audio engineers who know what it is. But I came to enjoy the tin can sound. I was very distant. I'm a very distant person. And I was just replicating that experience, that real life experience on the internet here. So that said, now Mike and Mala are probably going to be way quieter than me, so we'll just invert the problem of levels, showing that yes, we are the most professional broadcast in the world. Nonetheless, now that we've got that on, see, neither Mike nor Mala wanted to say anything in order to prove that statement, which is probably for the best.
Yes. Can you hear me now? Plovate, plover, piping plover.
It turns out, Mike, we could never hear you. We were always just guessing. So that was the travails of microphonography. I'm still working through it, and also working through the fact that I have to stay close to the microphone because it does change the audio quality when I'm further away from a microphone. Crazy idea that I actually have to keep my mouth near the thing that collects the noises from my mouth. But I'm learning very slowly. Speaking of learning very slowly, we have a topic. So I'm going to share the screen here and Grant Fritchie on X. So this comes from X via Mala and is Grant Fritchie, the silly idea, which I don't think is a silly idea. I'm going to zoom in a lot so that you folks can't see whatever else is there on X. But so Grant has a thought on Thursday. I like how he limits his thoughts to Thursdays. It's very efficient that way. You can spend the rest of the week just not having to think, but then you put all those thoughts together on Thursday and bam, just knock them out one after the other. It's like a to-do list. So Grant asks, do you use version-specific behaviors, like things that you can only do in SQL Server 2022 or Postgres version 16? Further, do you use platform-specific behaviors, maybe a thing that works in SQL Server but not elsewhere outside the SQL standard, and why or why not? I have an answer. I have the definitive answer to it, but I want to open this up to Mike and Tamala first.
Well, you're on mute.
Yep, Mala, you're on mute right now. All that talk about audio. We are a very professional broadcast.
Sorry about that. So I was trying to unmute myself on Twitch. It's been a while. No, we use version-specific behaviors. I would say if you're paying for a product as expensive as SQL Server, why not? I mean, of course we do. We like things with versions, and we do use them as appropriate as we upgrade and go. If you're invested in a particular relational product, I mean, of course we do. And I don't know if Kevin thinks the same here, but I think this whole idea that you should only use pure SQL and be able to move from one platform to another, easily. I don't know how easy that really is, and if it is really worth the effort to do things like that. That is, you won't pick anything that's outside of ANSI SQL that comes with SQL Server and crap like that. I didn't mean to call it crap, but that whole idea, I don't agree with that idea, because I don't think moving database platforms is very easy to do even to begin with. And some tools that I have seen, like code review tools and various linting tools and such that are written to support multiple platforms, they are actually seriously limited because they can't support any one platform in totality like that. They're very limited in functionality when they start writing one single tool that should work for Postgres and for SQL Server, for Oracle, and all that kind of stuff. That's just my 2 cents on it. I think moving database platforms is hard for many reasons, and it's not it's not going to make it any easy just because you want to adapt certain features and avoid the rest.
What do you say, Mike?
I totally agree with Mala saying. I think so one of the things I was talking about to somebody the other day is windowing clause. So the windowing clause is awesome, and you can only really do that in 2019 and later. in SQL Server?
No, SQL Server. So unless you're talking about naming a window is
Yeah.
2022, but using sum over or average over or first value, last value, lag and lead, that was all 2012.
No, agreed. No, the 2022 one, the where you can name the actual clause and then reuse it.
Yeah.
That's in Postgres. It's been in Postgres for a while. That's not in Oracle. I'm going off on a tangent, but there's some things that you kind of probably would want to take advantage of, even if they're not fully supported in other things. I have gotten in the habit of using things that are ANSI where I can, like current timestamp, offset fetch. So I tend to do that, but because I came to the group because we're switching, and so I think that Mala absolutely nailed it. Like the conversion is still challenging, and we have a conversion tool. So right now, what we're doing is we're putting in tickets, where kind of a team of people working on the transition. You can say, well, I have like these 17 scripts. Can you like convert them as much as you can? You put in a ticket, and then they have some sort of proprietary tool that we're paying for, and then they send it back to you. So it would probably change like list ag to like split. What is it called? String split, right? So stuff like that, or some of the date time functions are very. I mean, Oracle date formatting is just bonkers. So essentially, you can do date part and all this other stuff. So yeah, I totally agree with what Mal was saying. Like, take advantage of the stuff if you have it, even if it's platform specific or proprietary. I tend to try to be ANSI standard, but I also find that I'm swimming against the ocean. Like everybody else just writes top, or they don't even know what offset fetch is. They're like, what are you talking about? So sometimes it's like it's a losing battle, and you get good at what you're doing every day and learn what you have to.
Yeah, bad news for you, Mike, is that I definitely agree more with Mala than with you. Before I get to that, a few things here. Andrew says Postgres is not real. I agree. Postgres was the MFer on the back of the plane. Calling back to memes from last year. So if you want portable code, use ORMs, which sadly Anders will not be seen anymore on Twitch now that I've banned him. And Solomon asks, all right, well, how could you not use version and platform specific features? Isn't that part of how a platform is decided upon? Isn't that how all of the vendors sell their products? Like, upgrade now because you can do this, and choose us over this other competitor because they can't do that thing, and etc.
Snapshot windows, yeah. Snapshot tables and all, yeah.
Absolutely. So, you have all of that. And Andrew says, well, hey, if you can develop third-party software, then there could be an argument to run it on multiple backends, which that is, in fairness, I would consider that to be the most relevant reason for having a need for platform cross-compatibility, because otherwise, I don't think there's any value in it. So, like Andrew says here, hey, well, you could develop third-party software, but it absolutely sucks just keeping current versions of SQL in mind when you're developing. And when you're thinking about, will this work on Oracle and Postgres and MySQL and SQL Server and whatever other product your customer is using, then either you are developing lowest common denominator code, or you're developing specific code for each platform. I would consider those to be your two approaches. And I understand the developer feeling of, well, we want lowest common denominator so that we just have one copy of the SQL of the database. But as soon as you get to this idea of, well, indexing structures are different between Oracle, Postgres, and SQL Server, are you going to index all of those the same way? And the answer is no, we'll just have all the defaults and never create indexes because we don't know anything about indexes in our third-party product. But if you're trying to do it well, okay, SQL Server uses stored procedures and schemas very heavily for management of security and and isolation of code. Postgres technically has a notion of stored procedures, but it's quite a bit different from SQL Server. They make heavy use of functions. Oracle is a different story from both of them. So then the question is, all right, which style are you going to use? What is your lowest common denominator when the say best practice, as much as I hate the term, but the practices we would recommend as experts in a particular database product will differ across products. And even think of something like the apply operator. Yeah, there is an ANSI standard equivalent to the apply operator whose name came out and came into practice after SQL Server implemented it. But does that mean you're not going to use the apply operator because, well, that's T-SQL specific, and we would use lateral join instead? But that means you can't use lateral join because SQL Server doesn't have lateral join. So you're not going to take advantage of that in the other products either. If you're limiting yourself to just what do all of our viable products offer and all of our versions of products, like you're going to limit yourself to what SQL Server 2008 had in mind, then can you develop a product? Yeah, you could develop a really simple CRUD app. Obviously, people were doing it in 2008. But you're going to lose out on a whole lot of good functionality and performance improvements and syntax improvements and ways to understand your code better. And your developers will be more sane as a result. So as I scroll down through here a little bit more, Mala, you mentioned that you're researching some linting tools, and there were things that were written to work across multiple platforms, and assuming that you only stuck to the basics across all of these things, which I consider to be a bad idea. Solomon says, that is, if you're using the database to support an application that's either in-house or expensive and niche enough, commodity or general software requires a more agnostic approach to support whatever relational database the customer has. There is a separate approach. That separate approach is that you write optimized code for the different platforms. So you have a person who understands how Oracle works and can write good code to access an Oracle database. You have somebody who understands SQL Server. It could be the same person, but that person optimizes the code for SQL Server. They do things a bit differently, but at the level of a data layer, that's where you would handle this interchange between, are we retrieving data from Postgres, from Oracle, from SQL Server, whatever. That data layer doesn't need to be the same for all languages and for all data platforms. That is where you can harmonize it so that your higher up business level code can be consistent across all of these, but it requires extra work. However, if you're developing a product that you want not to be poorly written database garbage, then I think either you limit down what platforms you're willing to deploy to or willing officially to support, or you optimize across that platform and just understand that, yeah, there will be differences in code, and that we as a company who's officially distributing this product will have different variants. Now, it's not like everything will be radically different, that every single table will be different, every single query will be different. But I think that there will be enough differences that if you're talking about something that is more than 1,000 rows in our biggest table, then you're going to want to specialize. You're going to want to take advantage of the capabilities of that data platform and make the best use of it. Or, like Andrew says, just store everything in XML files and pretend that you don't even have a database. So sticking with ANSI-only SQL on the off chance that your software as a service company someday might change platforms means that you are missing out on a lot of efficiencies, code and system, for a future that might never happen. And I would argue is very unlikely to happen. Regardless of how often people talk about, oh, we're going to switch database platforms, it is not common for that to happen. More likely, you're going to keep it. You're going to keep that platform, and there's a possibility. I mean, there are companies that have shifted from one platform to another, but that's usually a thing that happens over the course of years. Or they say, well, we're going to keep our old stuff on this thing and then our new stuff over on this other thing, and that's how they slowly migrate. But yeah, I fully agree with that last sentiment from Solomon, that if you are sticking to ANSI only, and you are developing a database that you're not randomly distributing out to the rest of the world, then you're doing yourself a disservice. So I can understand the independent software provider, the ISV, the independent software vendor. I can understand those companies having more of an incentive to try to stick to ANSI SQL for everything. But even those companies, like I said, I think that there are strong enough benefits to having specialization within those platforms, and then just using your data layer to harmonize, to fill in those gaps. If you have a small product, it doesn't matter. Just throw enough RAM at it and try it. Hopefully it won't fall over. But if you're starting to talk about a product that has serious data responsibilities, data levels, then yeah, it'd be dumb not to take advantage of what each one of these platforms offers in terms of capabilities. But we're getting to some nice harmony here in chat about XML is a great way to store JSON documents. And Anders, SQL query I ran into the other day. Read JSON from SQL, convert it to text, then to XML so that they could query the XML. That is somebody who read, one of the 12 people who actually read the book on XQuery, and just trying to flaunt that. All in SQL. Yeah, of course it's all in SQL. Why would you not? That actually hurts me a little bit on the inside, to the point where I want to change my microphone settings back to lower quality so that you can't hear all the grumbling and swearing. But yeah, so Mala, you mentioned you've been working with Redshift lately, and Redshift supposedly uses Postgres, which it does. It uses a distributed version of Postgres, but it does not have a large number of Postgres features. So you want to talk about that?
So the way Amazon has implemented it is very Amazon specific, and it's not at all like, for example, you cannot even check if basic schema checks, like you cannot check if a column already exists in a table or not before adding it in Redshift. That is not allowed at a command level. You have to write a stored procedure to do that.
Yeah.
So that sort of stuff, Postgres doesn't have that sort of stuff. I mean, I don't recall dealing with that kind of limitations in Postgres at all. And a couple of more, I forget, don't come to mind, but all of this stuff like that, it's only a small subset of Postgres implemented in a certain way. So even with that, you have problems, let alone a different database platform.
Sure. And yeah. I would compare that to the T-SQL variant that's available in dedicated SQL pools in Azure Synapse Analytics, or what used to be Azure SQL Data Warehouse. Mm-hmm. It was technically T-SQL, but it was something like 80 to 85% of the total T-SQL surface area. And it had differences. Like, you can't not talk about distribution and how you're going to work across the different nodes. That's a core part of the definition of a table. So if I'm deploying out this software to a dedicated SQL pool, I have to be able to describe that. But then if I'm working on premises in SQL Server, I don't have that notion of, well, this is hash distributed, this is round robin distributed, and this is just replicated out to all the nodes. So we don't have that notion. And so we couldn't use the exact same script for all three of them because that concept doesn't exist. Now, in fairness, your independent software vendor is probably not going to release some software that they intend you to run on a dedicated SQL pool unless it's just on the dedicated SQL pool. And so in that case, maybe my example is a little bit overblown, but even when you are talking about across major platforms, yeah, there can be significant differences. And when you do make mention of warehousing capabilities, Redshift or dedicated SQL pools or some other like Teradata, the SQL interface for Teradata is quite a bit different from what you would expect to see from Oracle or SQL Server. You have some overlap, and technically you can run some ANSI SQL statements, but I don't know that you could even operate solely on ANSI SQL with Teradata. I think you would have to use some of their own specific mechanisms to even achieve more than an incredibly basic connection and simple query. But I think it was a good post by Grant. Good question, and ultimately, I would say for probably about 95% of companies, the answer should be, well, duh, of course you use version specific behaviors because that's the whole reason to upgrade to that version. And for 5% of companies, it's more like, I wish I could use version specific features, but my software has to work on SQL Server 2000 because we still have customers using SQL Server 2000, and that's how you lose your hair. Most companies do not have the skill or knowledge to not make it specific. I think it's a fair statement. And, I would say I agree with you, but I would also say that even if you do have the knowledge and the skill to not make it specific, I think you should still make it specific. Unless there is a compelling business reason why you have to make something operate generically, I don't see operating generically as a feature or a great benefit of its own. I don't see it as a technical benefit, and I don't see it as a business benefit unless you are in a specific case where you can clearly state what is the return on investment from having that generic data design. And if you can, okay, we can have that discussion, and that could even be the right answer. But I would start from the assumption that no, you really don't need generic data access. That what you really need is high quality data access for the platform that you're using, because let's be honest, you're not changing it anytime soon. So Marshall says that it also does matter if you're developing for your own systems or platform, which tend to be relatively consistent, or if you're building out tooling that will be used by a variety of people that are on different platforms or versions. And yeah, I think that there is a fair argument there. I still, this is where I would say in my own grumpy contrarian way that this is where your data layer should isolate what your consistent business code looks like and allow you to take advantage of the capabilities of whatever platforms or versions of platforms that people are using. I don't think you should have complex SQL Server stored procedures that check to see what version you're in, and based on the version, generate their own dynamic SQL to do whatever nonsense. Unless, I was going to say, unless you have something like SP Who Is Active, where you're trying to make this one stored procedure instead of having different variants for different versions. And Who Is Active, I mean, that's a little bit of a different story. I have a minor amount of trouble in exactly saying why I would consider that a different story than application code, except to say Adam Mechanic's a better developer than you. Eric Darling's a better developer than you. I mean, so, things Adam Mechanic can get away with, things the rest of us can get away with, not the same.
Yeah.
And I do believe as well that, yeah, you could develop something like, okay, we're going to be able to support many different versions of SQL Server. And so if you're on 2008, then we'll have some variant. If you're on 2012, we'll have some variant, and 2019 we'll have some variant. Rather than we're going to develop everything to our lowest common denominator in 2008 and not take advantage of any of the functionality since then. Or you can even get to the point of adding version-specific coding within that procedure. Yeah, which is what I'm talking about with who is active. There are actual checks to see what your version number is, and will display certain information or retrieve it from different DMVs based on what version of SQL Server you have, including if it's Azure SQL Database or on-premises SQL Server. So yeah, there is that capability. I would say for your average company that is providing a database for general use that a whole bunch of randos will install on their own systems and use as third-party software on their systems, then I would hesitate to get too complex in terms of version-specific checks within procedures, and would probably push more toward deploying capabilities based on that version. So your installation executable could check to see what version of SQL Server it is and deploy out certain scripts, certain stored procedures based on what version of SQL Server that is. I understand that that means a little bit extra code that is technically partially duplicative, but I think it is also a lot easier for people to diagnose issues, troubleshoot issues, and work with later. In fairness, then you could say, well, what happens when the customer who has 2008 upgrades to 2019? And so how does your application code update as well? We don't have to worry about losing things because, well, 2008 was the last version where they really deprecated things, especially syntax related. So you wouldn't have to worry so much in that respect. But in terms of, hey, you're not taking advantage of the neat stuff, then, yeah, hey, Anders says, okay, we check the version of SQL at startup, which that's a way to do it. Or you can check it. You can have some upgrade script or something. So, yeah, there are ways to do this where it is more effort from the standpoint of the ISV. It is more copies, scare quotes, copies of the data code. But I think it does a service to the customer because it allows you to take better advantage of the functionality that is available to the customer and to design your product in a way that works best for the customer without the customer having to fight the system. You're right that you can't upgrade 2008 to 2019 in one step. You would have to go through 2012 first. But even if so, if you do that bounce and you land on 2019, there's functionality that existed through 2012 and especially 2012 and a little bit in 2016 and 2019 that would be beneficial to take advantage of in the code base. And just laying that out as an example. Actually, 2022 has a lot of functionality that T-SQL functionality that made life a lot easier for developers.
Yes. Agree. Fully agree.
So I don't know. David Stein here says, hey, I just stick to everything that was supported back in 2008 and 2012. But then my question would be, well, which one do you support, 2008 or 2012? Because there was a big difference in 2012. 2012 is where you got try-catch. Try-cast, try-convert, try-parse. 2012 is where you got window functions over more than just the row number, rank, dense rank, and intile. 2012 is where you got several significant improvements. That's different from 2008. The way that I would write a running total in 2008 is awful. The way that I would write in 2012 is trivial.
Mm-hmm.
And I think just doing this 2008/2012 is a way of obscuring the fact that was a big difference. If you said 2012/2014, I'd be like, oh, okay. Because the only real T-SQL thing that updated in 2014 was the ability to add indexes in line in a create table statement.
Mm-hmm.
Otherwise, you didn't really change the main surface area of SQL Server. There were new functionality like in-memory OLTP and the like, but when you're talking about just T-SQL code, there wasn't much that came in 2014. So, yeah. Actually, Grant has a good point. Hey, does it make sense to use trace only because it worked on 2008 and extended events didn't? Extended events barely worked in 2008. So Grant's right. There was no UI for it. You
Right.
had to follow. I think Jonathan Cahias was one of the few people who had really good scripts on how to get extended events working in 2008,
Yes.
and it was all a mess.
Yeah.
Table variables. Table variables, I want to say, came about in either it was 2005 or 2008.
2005, Kevin.
Okay.
Table variables are pretty old. Yeah.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
table valued parameters were 2008.
Yeah.
'Cause-
TVPs, yeah.
Yeah. So user defined table types in a stored
Yeah.
procedure as a read only parameter.
Yeah.
That was a 2008 thing. So I agree with Grant. Been at this for too long. I agree. All right. Peter Shore, this is we've always done this thing. One would hope that part of the reason is you choose a platform to leverage the platform specific functionality, whether it's query engine, high availability and disaster recovery, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, so you had a major project. Yeah, I wanted to say it was about that time. It was 2005, but then I remembered TVPs as 2008, and so I couldn't remember for sure. But good call out. Nonetheless, I think that'll close the books on this forever.
Good discussion. I
All
share it with Grant after you publish it, Kevin. I'm sure he's going to like it a lot.
Hopefully. So here, I've got a SQL Tips article from Daniel Cabamonte. I may have mispronounced the name. That will happen. I am morally obligated to mispronounce names for at least 8 times. Mike knows this, considering that I've mispronounced his last name for the first 2 years of Shop Talk, and he never corrected me.
Well, that happens a lot.
So Daniel talks about 5 normal forms, and I'll just lay it out up front because I did this with Curated SQL this morning, so I did curate this. I'm okay with his article on the whole, except for one point. And I appreciate, I'll give you, before I get to that point, I'm going to give you 2 things that I appreciate. Appreciation number 1, this goes to 5th normal form. It does not go to 6th, but it does go to 5th. So I appreciate the fact that Daniel does take us to 5th normal form. Second, I appreciate that Daniel includes the 2 greatest of the normal forms, Boyce Cod and 5th. They are the S tier normal forms. And it is important to include Boyce Cod because 2nd and 3rd normal form are dead to me. Boyce Cod is the only normal form that matters below 5. That's my hill. That's the hill I'm going to die on. Now, let's talk about those normal forms real quick. First normal form. So to comply with first normal form, a cell, I don't like the term cell because I guess I have become a little bit of a normalization snob thanks to CJ Date. And Date hates the concept of like cell, and this isn't a spreadsheet. But a cell cannot have more than a single value. It must be indivisible. So normally people call this atomic, atomicity. That's the one I'm going to argue with. Might as well just lay that out up front. Rows contain a primary key to identify each row. So yeah, every tuple must be unique. There is no top to bottom ordering, nor left to right ordering. So tuples have no inherent ordering. Attributes within a tuple have no inherent ordering. Perfectly valid. Both of this falls from set theory. And no duplication is allowed, which is implied by the fact that you have an identifier that is a primary key. Sets cannot have duplicates. Just all this follows from set theory. Honestly, all I know is normalization. I learned from Kevin. That may be a problem. The misconceptions around it are just mind-boggling. Yeah, there is. So let's talk about atomicity, because what I'm going to do, I'm gonna break the law. Let me open up Caliber. So I have a PDF, or yeah, EPUB. It's actually an EPUB copy of Chris Date's book on normalization, and it is a fantastic book. The number one misconception I had: each normal form builds on top of the prior. I think that's a fair conception at the whole, but you're right. They do not build on top of each other one by one by one by one. 1, 2, and 3 kind of do, but once you get past 3, they don't. And once you get into the cottage industry of baby normal forms, elementary key normal form, and those types, the types that nobody ever notices in the business world, and I don't even know that I can give you a proper example of one, they just kind of exist to make sure that somebody got a PhD. You haven't lived until you had to rewrite an app in 5th normal form because they exceeded the join limit in SQL. I mean, look, I'm going to argue that that's just not good. That's probably not good at data architecture to begin with, and it's not a normalization problem. That's where I'm going to land, mostly because it's typically not a good data architecture. Like, it's not a normalization problem generally. It's just you need to do this better. All right, I'm going to share a different screen. I need to share a window. There we go. This is a couple pages from Chris Date's book, Database Design and Relational Theory, Normal Forms, and all that jazz. So let me drop a link to the book in chat so that you can buy some as well. Buy that book. It is actually a really good book. It is fairly academic. It's like trying to bridge the gap between I'm academic and I'm not academic. So hence the name, Normal Forms, and all that jazz. But I will note that Date is not perfect at avoiding the academic. And I have an entire talk that I've done. So let me drop a link to the talk as well. And this is the one that I did in Richmond for 2.5 hours. So I can talk for a long time on the topic. But this talk is, the intent of it is actually to simplify what Date lays out in the book. And I also did a YouTube playlist, so you can get that as well. But okay, I did a search in the book for atomic because this is something that Date brings up very clearly. So we have this notion of data value atomicity. And this is one thing that, quote, everybody knows, unquote, about relations in a relational model. Namely, that attribute values within such relations are supposed to be atomic, right? So what does atomic actually mean? And COD, if I zoom in just a little bit so that it's a little easier to see. Basically, COD had a paper in 1970 that laid out, well, this is what I mean by atomic. And he meant non-decomposable. But non-decomposable by the DBMS, which there's no way the user can ask the DBMS to perform some such decomposition, either explicitly or implicitly, on his or her behalf. If I go further, I'm going to come here. This is actually a question. This is one of the quiz questions at the end of the chapter, and talking about atomicity. And there is a lot of use of the concept of atomicity in the technical literature. So, for example, El-Masri and Navathe in Fundamentals of Database Systems, they talk about this idea of atomic or indivisible values. Ramakrishnan and Gurka talk about if every a relation is in first normal form, if every field contains only atomic values, that is, no lists or sets. Garcia Molina, Ullman, and Jennifer Weedham. And Jennifer Weedham, by the way, had a YouTube video that was the best description of Boyce-Codd normal form decomposition that I ever saw. So I have a lot of respect for Jennifer Weedham. First normal form is simply the condition that every component of every tuple is an atomic value. You have this atomicity, atomic. But here's the thing. First normal form really doesn't have anything to do with atomicity. And let me prove it to you. Let me prove it to you in the example that Daniel shows. So let me share this back. Not just big words, but a lot of words. Yeah, that'll happen. I'm just as guilty of that as other people. But let's talk about this first normal form example, because this is Daniel's example of here's how you get to first normal form, including atomicity. So he has this non-1NF table. And player information, LeBron James with the Lakers and Stephen Curry of the Warriors. Team info, Frank Vogel of Los Angeles, Steve Kerr of San Francisco. Game stats and arena info and sponsor. And he says, hey, we can break this stuff out. So we can have a player name. We can have a team name, a coach name, and a team city, et cetera, et cetera. But then I ask, is this atomic? Is LeBron James atomic? Can I not decompose LeBron James into the first name LeBron and the last name James? Could I not break it out into Le, Bron, and James as syllables? So could I not have a multi-syllabic set of attributes? Stephen Curry. So I've got 4 there. Why could I not decompose that? Could I not decompose it into the individual letters? Could I not decompose it into the bits that form the individual letters? All of this stuff is... all of this stuff here is decomposable, and I'm gonna do a little ban. There we go. But don't worry, I didn't lose my train of thought. I just paused the train of thought at the station as I had to do a quick ban. But this is decomposition, and if you're telling me no, you can't decompose this further, sure, I decomposed it 3-4 separate ways. Well, decomposition is more of a business thing. If that's the argument, I fully agree. Decomposition is a business thing. Normalization is a set of mathematical principles that is based around relational algebra. It is based around set theory. It is not based around business necessity. Business necessity will define how we can apply the rules of normalization in a way that makes sense for a particular scenario. So the business necessities, the rules of the business, of how the business operates, of how people look at and observe and make use of this data will define whether we have done a good enough job. But what that means is that those business rules are necessary for us to perform normalization, but they are not normalization itself, because we could not mathematically apply a rule of atomicity. I don't have a mathematical definition of atomicity like I have of the rest of these, where my mathematical definition of the rest of these, if I go back to curated SQL from this morning, this definition comes directly from date. Given some relational variable R with a heading H containing attributes A sub 1 through A sub n of types T sub 1 through T sub n, all tuples follow heading H and have one value of type T sub I for attribute A sub I. That is the mathematical definition. Translating that into terms that are easier for a human to understand, if we have, I'll call it a table. If I have a table, I have a heading on that table. That heading has a set of attributes. I have columns with data types. So each attribute is a column. Each column has a data type. This is first name in varchar 98. Then every tuple, every row in that table, every tuple in that relational variable follows the heading, meaning that you have to have those same attributes and they have to be the same data types. It says nothing about whether or not an attribute is atomic or decomposable or is composable. there is no definition of atomicity that works. And actually, the irony here is, if you think about the term atom, the Greek term of atom is the indivisible smallest attribute of a thing. But then we have subatomic particles. Each atom, we've learned, is itself made up of protons and neutrons and electrons. And then we have subatomic particles. We have concepts of quarks. We have other things that are lower than an atomic level, which defeats the whole purpose of this is the atom. And that's kind of the irony here in trying to say that you have atomicity in your attributes here to make them in first normal form, because is this really atomic? No, not really. Or maybe it is. Because the problem is, it all depends on what do the people who are using your data need. Do they need just the full name? If they just need the full name, then we have this notion of atomicity, yeah. But if we need the first name and the last name, and we need them to be separate, or we need the syllables, or we need English pronunciation of the names, because we're doing a media guide and we want to have English pronunciations. If we're doing something like that, then this may or may not be sufficient. And yet, this is in first normal form. Because I have, actually technically all of these are in first normal form. Because first normal form doesn't make judgment on the contents of the attributes, just that you have uniqueness. So each one of these tuples is unique. You have consistency in attributes. Each one of them has the 5 attributes. You can see that there are no missing values. And that the data types are consistent. That the player information is a string, team info is a string, game stats is a string, arena info is a string, and sponsor is a string. Technically, this is in first normal form. Is this a good data design? No, absolutely not. This is a pretty bad data design, especially if you care about information like the city name or the team name. If you care about what these things are supposed to represent, if they're supposed to be measures, points, assists, and rebounds. If we do care about that stuff, then yeah, you should break this out into a way that is easier for people to work with. But if this is the level of specificity that your business needs, if this is somehow sufficient for their purposes, congratulations, you're actually in first normal form. Is it a good design? No, probably not. But it is technically first normal form. First normal form is a lot weaker than what people think it is. Why is Kevin making my head hurt on a Monday evening? That's only because I can't make your head hurt any other day of the week. The restraining order prohibits that. So, all that aside, I still recommend read Daniel's article. I think it is a good description of several normal forms. Daniel does talk about second and third normal form, which I don't really care about. Boyce Codd normal form, which I absolutely care about, and kind of gets into some of those details. Fourth normal form, I like the description here. I appreciate the fact that Daniel mentions fifth normal form. It is also known as project join normal form. It's project join, but I like to want to call it project join. This is a tough one to discuss because you have to talk about join dependencies, and Daniel's trying to avoid all the mathy terms that I was using. I was fine until I went on the rant about normalization. Look, if you're going to get me riled up about normalization, that is an easy way to wind me up. So, it's a good article. I like it. I recommend it. I do disagree with the notion of atomicity, but looking at the segment of Date's book, a bunch of well-respected people believe that atomicity is a thing in normalization. I disagree with them. I follow along with Date's argument that atomicity is not really a thing. It's not a mathematical concept that we can put into the realm of normalization. I'll rephrase it that way. Atomicity is a useful business concept that helps us describe whether or not our attributes are sufficient for the specific scenario we're dealing with, but is not sufficient for creating general purpose rules. So strike that one out, and you can talk about breaking things out to make more sense based on how people will use the data. And I think that's perfectly reasonable. But normally I'm the one to get you riled up, not yourself. I am perfectly capable of derailing myself. Thank you very much. All right. I'm going to stop sharing here because I think we've done it. Except for that 5NF database, I've never seen a database designed to a specific level. Yeah, it's uncommon. I struggle to think of good examples of that either, and I think it is actually to our detriment as an industry that we don't think in terms of data architecture, and that we don't think a little more deeply about data architecture. Because I do believe that this is how we get ourselves developed into corners where 5 years later you realize, wow, this was a bad decision, but it's too late to fix it. And that's because, we just started developing and didn't really think about what the consequences would be. Didn't really ask the questions. In fairness, sometimes the answers change. Sometimes you ask the questions and the answer starts out as one thing, and then a year later, actually, we're changing our minds and it's totally different now. Or you pivot. Companies pivoting. Hey, this thing that used to be true is no longer true, and therefore you can't trust it as a functional dependency anymore. And at that point, we've got to change the data model. So that is a challenge. I will agree with that. And Andrew's number one rule for database design: users don't know what they need. Design inflexibility. Yes, but there's also a limit. If you start feeling the urge for the one true database style of programming, of entity attribute value for everything, then that is where it's time to take a minty, refreshing drink and sit down on the chair and just maybe take a break from that database design for a little bit because you're not in your right mind. And to that extent, I gotta find the article from Phil Factor that I just kind of here it is. When the fever is over and one's work is done. I love this article from Phil Factor on the topic of entity attribute value and how we all come up with this at some point in our careers as, wow, I'm going to revolutionize database design. And then you try to implement it and it fails miserably because entity attribute value is not a good design. It is very much an anti-pattern. And then you hopefully get back on the road to recovery and learn about good database architecture. So I recommend that article. It's coming up on 15. It's over 15 years old at this point, but still a fantastic article from a great writer in the community. And with that, Phil's articles are timeless. I still have his book, his PDF book of articles, and enjoy it every time that a new one comes out. It's much less common these days.
Have you ever met him?
I've never met him, no. Or if I have met him, I don't know that I've met him.
Phil Selko?
No, Phil Factor.
Oh.
Yeah, it's obviously a tongue-in-cheek name. It's a pseudonym.
I only know that he's British.
Yes.
That much I managed to get out of the folks at Redgate.
Right. Yeah, he's Is he one person? Yes, I believe he is one person. I don't think this is a combination of multiple writers working under a pen name. I think it is one person working under a pen name. But if I have met him, then I don't know because he didn't tell me. But I do I like his work a lot. EAV design is closely related to the Dunning-Kruger effect, or it's a symptom of it. Sad to admit, it got me early on in my career. It gets all of us, and that's actually what I like about Phil's article is, we all hit that notion of cleverness, and it feels clever at the time until you learn a bit more and realize why it's so bad. It's a siren song, and so don't feel bad about it. It gets all of us. Had a few designs I've trashed and started over, as you should. I mean, it's perfectly fine to trash a design and say, nope, this is not a good design. I'm going to start it over from first principles and try to make a good design. I think we can get ourselves designed into corners. And at that point, you just have to realize, okay, if I can't, slap enough duct tape on this thing to make it work, then maybe it's time for me to start it over. Speaking of starting it over, we are going to wrap up this episode of Shop Talk. Use lesson learned. It would take me a fifth of the time to redesign from scratch. Sure. Now, the problem is getting the app developers to actually make updates. That's the real problem. It's the whole premise of Goodwill Hunting and the argument in a bar with the current Harvard student. There's always more to learn and evolve. Absolutely. Absolutely. But that's all the learning and evolution we're going to do today, because we're going to wrap up this episode of Shop Talk so that I can go out there and give myself heat stroke. So with that, everybody, remember that tomorrow we do have our in-person Triangle Area SQL Server user group meeting. It is at Tech Systems down by Crabtree Mall. The address is in the meetup post, meetup.com/tripass, where we will have a couple Microsoft developers, including David Mowry, who are going to talk to us about an API builder that you can use on your Azure SQL products, or Azure data products, I should say, because it's Cosmos DB, SQL Database, SQL Managed Instance, and a few other products. You can build a REST API or GraphQL API very easily out of it. We're going to talk about all that tomorrow, meetup.com/tripass. And until we do see each other either there or in a future video, everyone, take care.